Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast. This is Peter.
This is Ashley Renee.
This is Brooke.
And this is Walker.
Hey, it's great to see you guys. It's been a long time. A long time.
It's been a long time.
How are you guys doing?
When was the last episode?
Well, you know, I released some episodes that we recorded a long time ago, the women composers ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that took a couple months. And then this summer, I've been working on other things, and we've been releasing some opera fixes, which have been pretty cool. So welcome to post-pandemic world. No, it's not even post-pandemic world.
No, we got
the
aftermath. And also polio. So, you know,
yeah,
we got
polio world. Welcome to polio world.
Polio and
welcome to the current world.
Yeah.
Monkeypox and polio and still COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Did you all get...
We're not satisfied with only one.
No.
No, we're not. We need more.
Right.
You know, when I was a kid, they still gave us the smallpox vaccine shots. Did you get them? Did you?
Yeah.
You did?
Oh, like the dimple one on your shoulder?
Yeah, I got it.
You have the dimple? Yeah, my mom has that. I don't have that one. I don't think I have.
Oh, yeah, you're
but
right.
I think it stopped in the 70s.
Yeah. I think I was like the last couple years they did it.
Yeah.
So welcome to the other pandemic world.
Other pandemic.
At least you can...
Think about it.
Right.
Because none of us have it.
Because we
At the
can,
moment.
right.
We think.
Right. None of us currently.
Yeah.
Yes.
Say that.
So I'd like to talk about some of the things we've seen. Now, there were a couple of things I was supposed to see that I never got to see, like Into the Woods and Hamlet at the Met, because I had COVID for 10 days and they were within a week of each other. Oh. So I missed the things I was looking forward to for like 9 months. So I missed it. Did anyone see the Hamlet at the Met?
I did.
Oh, report.
I thought it was great. It was really, really difficult music, in the sense that it was very, very sort of angular, atonal. It took a minute, and I live in that world, but even with living in that world, like it took a minute to like adjust to the aural landscape, I guess. And but I thought it was really well done. The guy who played Hamlet, Alan Clayton, was the Hamlet, and it was extraordinary.
Not to be. There's the point to die, to sleep. Is that all? No, to sleep, to dream. There it goes. To sleep, to dream. For in that dream of death, when we're awaked, before the undiscovered country, from
And I saw it on a night when 5 of the principals were out with COVID, so we saw a bunch of the covers.
Oh, cool.
But it was still, there was the voices got a little lost in the orchestra, which is often the case when covers go on at the Met, sadly, because they don't get enough time to like figure that out. But I thought it was a really cool production, and I was really glad I saw it.
Let me get the librettist here. It's Michel Carré or Michael Carey, however he's or she's. It might even be a woman. Jules Barbier.
Wait a minute.
There's 2 names.
English? Right.
No, this is the wrong Hamlet.
I was like, that's not right. That is.
There's been more than
right.
one. There's been a few operas.
Yeah, that one. That's the French Hamlet from a long time ago. That's not the one we're talking about.
Everyone
So
is
then
French.
Michel Carré was correct. I said it right.
Yes, but that
right.
was a while ago. No, it's an English dude.
The production that Brenda Ray was in that I wanted to
Yeah.
see.
Oh,
Yeah.
The conductor was Nicholas Carter, and he was also excellent. And that score was no joke to put together. I mean, it was so hard musically, but it was really good. I did not know what to expect. I did not know whether I was going to like it or not, but I thought it was great. So
The libretto was by Matthew Jocelyn.
okay, yes, that sounds right.
I can't believe the Met is still not naming librettist on the website. Like, I thought
It did.
insane. That's
It did. I found it in the title card.
It's
Okay.
so
Yeah,
like
it
buried.
says-
It's like on the creators page. Why isn't the librettist like right there?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Mhm.
Right. Agreed.
So my partner went to see it, and he actually absolutely loved it. He thought the orchestrations especially were like over the top. And he had an observation perhaps that other people had is, melodically, it wasn't as interesting to him. Like it was closer to spoken speech than it was to singing. But he absolutely adored it. So and I missed it.
Yeah. I mean, and to take that play and make it an opera in and of itself is quite an ambitious feat. And it was a real, if you can get your hands on the libretto just to read it, it's really interesting the way they constructed it. Presentation.
Is it written with Shakespeare's actual words, or is it like a
but it's sort of
modernized version?
It is Shakespeare's text, but it's deconstructed and obviously cut down a lot. So and it's been a while. I mean, I saw it in
wasn't it
May.
in like May? Yeah. I was out of the country. That's why I couldn't go. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's been a while, but what I remember is it sort of like rearranged some things and deconstructed some things, and it really made it about, I mean, this play's already about like Hamlet falling apart, but like really focused on like Hamlet as like this guy who was just like losing his mind. And it was really interesting.
Cool.
It was really cool. I don't know that the Met will do it again, because I don't know what kind of audience it had, but like I hope it gets more. I know they did it at Glyndebourne, but I hope they do more productions of it, because it was really cool. It was really cool. And
So
Alan Clayton was amazing. Sorry.
Really? Well, I'm actually really excited that the Met seems to be taking seriously the idea of doing newer works. It seems that they realize that they're being more and more successful. Those houses are selling well. I'm glad, because next year they're doing Champion.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see that. Have you seen it?
No. Has it been done before?
Yeah. Yeah, it has.
Where did it?
St. Louis, maybe?
Was it St. Louis that did that one too? Because I know that they did his first opera, Fire Shut Up in My Bones. I didn't know if they did it at St. Louis.
Well, they were so happy with Terence Blanchard's previous work. I don't blame them. They probably said, "Do you have a new one?" And he says, "Well, I have the first opera I wrote."
I should have made that up too, but I think it was St. Louis, but
they're doing Champion. Aren't they doing? Is this the season Malcolm X or X? It's coming.
I know they're doing the hours,
Yeah.
the Kevin Puts hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Can
let me
I
look.
rant about that for a minute? Not the production. I don't care about the production, but the marketing campaign around that opera is really stupid.
Okay, go ahead, rant.
It is a picture of Renee Fleming and Kelly O'Hara and Joyce DiDonato.
Joyce DiDonato, yes.
Just the three of them. It doesn't explain anything about what the opera is or who any of these people are or why anyone would want to go. And they plaster it all over everything as if people know who they are.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was
I
like a
just, like-
fundraiser or something
Yeah,
at first. I was like,
right.
oh, is it a masterclass?
I've had like multiple people send me like a picture of it in a program for like a Broadway show or whatever, and they're like, "What is the Met doing? Who sanctioned this advertising? This is so stupid." And they also are
So
sort
it
of
doesn't
using
have the
it as, like,
title on it?
I mean, it says the hours, but they're like
but that's
assuming they're making this huge assumption that, like, first of all, the audience knows what the hours is, which isn't necessarily a good assumption, just in general.
Right.
It's kind of an esoteric movie. And then they're assuming that you know who the singers are. Also not a
Right.
good assumption. Even like they're famous in opera, but not for necessarily Broadway audiences or people looking at billboards. And and they're assuming
Yeah.
that like this is somehow going, and it's a wildly unflattering photo of all of them. So it's sort of, I mean, which makes sense for the content, but you're also like, what? Who is this for? Like, who is this ad for?
Yeah,
Like,
well,
Yeah.
Opera audiences who are going to Broadway shows? Like, I don't get it.
all right, I'm going to talk about a gay man of a certain age. Okay, so
Okay.
Can offer a unique perspective here, Peter.
yes, so
Uh-huh.
it's based on a novel by Michael Cunningham, and when it came out, it was very popular. But that was must have been in 2004 or 5, and I've never been in a book club or a reading group in my life, but my friends decided to do it for that book. So maybe it was like really, I mean, I don't know, but maybe it was really popular, and maybe the people doing the programming felt that it was like part of the canon, the hours, and then it became a movie. They just assume everyone knows it. But certainly the advertising, I have no idea what it's going to be like. I have no idea really anything about it. And I completely agree with you, Brooke.
Multiple people have had that impression because they've sent me pictures of it when they go to see, Six or something on Broadway, and there's an ad for, or Into the Woods or whatever, and there's an ad, and they're like, "What is this advertisement?"
Right.
I saw it, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." I didn't even like put what it was, that it was.
Right. Which
I really thought it was like a master
problematic because you're connected to the industry and you didn't even make the connection as to what it was.
Well, probably Renee. I guess Renee Fleming is the only one who would really have like crossover appeal to theater audiences. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily know the other two singers, right?
Kelly O'Hara, they would probably.
Oh,
But
Kelly,
none
for
of-
sure.
Okay, so those two,
none
they
of
would,
them
yeah.
None of them were named in the ad, I don't think. So if you didn't immediately recognize them, which you might not have, because again, it's not a super flattering photo, and they're like in costume. It's very strange. I was like, who? I was already going to go see it, so
Right.
it's not for me. Who is this
Who is it
appealing
for?
to?
Right,
Who is
right.
it reaching that wouldn't have already gone?
Right.
So, did anyone else read the book or seen the movie? No,
I haven't.
no. So it's loosely based on Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway and
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to. We actually, I know that Chuck has interviewed some people for that, and we're going to release that as a.
Yeah, so many things have been done to that story.
I
And
know.
every time it comes up, I'm like, I should probably check that out because I still don't know what that's about. I even have the book Mrs. Dalloway on my bookshelf, and I've always meant to read it, but I just never seem to get around to it. And now the movie has gone by, and now the opera is, and I'm not going to see the opera probably. So I'm probably going to go to my grave without knowing what the story is.
That's like Was it like not a horror, but like
There is death.
it's suspenseful, right? Like the movie, is it like Nicole Kidman or something?
Nicole,
Yeah,
didn't she win an Oscar for that?
yeah,
for
Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore.
Meryl Streep. Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Mhm.
thinking of The Others, not The
Oh, The
Hours.
Others is a ghost story.
Yeah,
That's a
the
horror ghost story,
But
yeah.
The Hours is, which I think also has Nicole Kidman in it.
Yeah, yeah. Others has Nicole Kidman. That's one of my favorite movies, actually. I love that movie. Shows how deep I am. I just went to a horror movie, and I was like,
I mean, horror is great. Horror is a great genre. What are you talking about?
It
Horror
is.
amazing.
I
It
can't
is.
do it.
You could do a whole podcast episode on horror genre.
That's right.
I didn't see the movie yet, but I don't think it fit in that genre, but maybe it did.
In the horror,
No, I'm
the
definitely
Hours,
thinking
yeah.
The Others.
The Others, yeah.
The Hours.
It kind of sounds like The Hours a little bit.
Almost
They both
spelled
have
the
an
same
S.
too. Close.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there's another movie called The Hours and Times, which makes it even more confusing. That's
Oh.
about how John Lennon supposedly had like some kind of gay affair with his manager.
The Hours and Times.
Hours and Times, yeah. It's like it was shot in black and white. It's sort of an indie movie, and I don't know what connection Hours and Times has to do with.
Did that actually happen though?
Yeah, well, supposedly he went on this like spree. He like was too stressed out being in the Beatles, and he just needed to take like a few weeks off. And he went off with his manager, who was gay, and supposedly they had this sort of like affair.
Oh my gosh!
Anyway,
Imagine asking Siri for the hours and times of the showings for Hours and Times. Let's see what Siri would say.
exactly. Now we're really confused. At least I'm confused.
That would be horrible.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh. So I'll talk about the one thing I watched and I saw very recently. So if you listen to our Women Composers podcast the past couple months, Letters That You Will Not Get, it just had its world premiere with up at Irondale with the One Woman Festival. And that is Kirsten Fulness's opera with librettist Susan Werby and Kate Holland. So I went to the opening night of that. Really remarkable piece. All women, which was really interesting. All women in the orchestra, all women in the production. I mean, there was not a single man involved, and they made a point to do that, which was so cool. It's a series of letters set to music and beautifully structured. It was directed really beautifully. Let me get the director's name so I don't get this wrong. Yes, by Kate Bergstrom. She structured these things that could have just been sort of very disconnected in a really beautiful visual way. It was almost like dance. The music was gorgeous, and we've played it on our podcast before, but really wonderful production. Once again, though, it falls into that interesting chasm between opera and oratorio and musical theater that happens a lot, I think, especially with composers just getting into opera, where it's almost like an oratorio and the story doesn't develop in a narrative way. It's more of a structure around stories. But I thought it was really wonderful, beautiful playing in the orchestra. Mila Henry conducting did a great job. The beautiful pacing. They had projections. Masha Siemering, Krista Smith, and the projection designer Stefania Bulbarella. At first, I was scared because the first thing it did, they had several things, and all of a sudden, in big letters, huge letters, it said "Letters That You Will Not Get." It was like really big, and it made me think, "Oh no, that better not happen through the whole thing." Like had the letters and words, and then it was sort of like a title on a movie, and then it was gone, and the rest of it was so beautiful. It was illustrations that were animated and went well, really well, felt timely, and it was really beautiful, and it showed the connections between women's points of view about war from all sides of the conflict, and it was really just really beautiful. So saw that was my big production to have seen. Actually, Renee, you haven't seen anything?
I watched a stream of Ariadne Alphanaxos,
Oh, good.
the Lake Area's music festival. Just because a bunch of my friends were in it. I really wanted to see them do this. Really beautiful, I'm addicted to Strauss, so any excuse. But it was a really beautiful production as far the production was pretty straightforward, I would say. But the singing was just remarkable. Really, really, really beautifully done.
Es geht vom Tanzen und Singen Tage, es trocknet Singen mir Ruhe, wie Tanzen und Singen Tage, es trocknet Tränen des Weibes, es geht vom Tanzen und Singen Tage, es geht vom Tanzen und Singen Tage. Diese schwingen, tanzen und singen, gebeten der eine oder andere. Die Sache gibt mich drüben, will sich anzusehen.
Serbinetta was Brandy Sutton. And I felt invested because I had just sort of watched so many of the people who were in the show, like their journeys on like social media, getting ready for it, and kind of undertaking this big juggernaut of an opera. But it was just a really well done, just great singing. It's on YouTube. I highly encourage you to just give up a couple hours and some change, and just take it in. Because I don't know, there's not a lot of productions that have like just such nice, young, fresh voices that are like ripe and in their prime doing this.
Yeah.
So it was just a very first the cast was just, I think everyone who was in there. I mean, it's like Justin Michael Austin was in it, Brandy Sutton, the Ariadne was amazing. What was it? Felicia Moore. I don't know if anyone knows this.
Oh,
No.
Good, yeah. Abby Levis. Abby, I'm sorry if you watch this. We definitely did opera camp together, and I'm jacking up your last name. Abby was amazing. She played composer. I mean, it's like I could just go on, but it really was like such a great cast of singers.
And they did it in the original. They did it in German.
Yep, they did
Okay.
it in German. It was very well done.
Tell me
Yeah.
about the opera company one more time. I'm trying to. Where are they located and what's their name?
I don't really know. This is the first time I'm really hearing. I know about the opera company because I'm invested in the singers through the show. Lakes Area Music Festival,
Brainerd, Minnesota.
Brainerd, Minnesota. Yeah, I thought it was Midwest. Yeah. But they live streamed it, which I think like a lot of folks aren't doing.
Mhm.
But it's live stream. It's still available to consume. Right now, it's not behind a paywall, which people got to charge. So I'm not saying that. But they didn't, and it was wonderfully done. And I'm so glad I can still access it because it's actually, I will sit there and what is this runtime? Like 2.5, almost 3 hours. I'll watch it multiple times, like because it's that
Wow.
great of a production.
I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Walker,
Yeah.
you said you haven't seen any opera. Are you in Washington? Have you like sequestered yourself and
There's
child
no opera
raising?
in Washington
There's
at
no.
all. I don't know if there's no. Just kidding. No, I did see something before our last episode, but now I would like to talk about an opera that I wish I could see, and that is it's an opera called Omar, and it is at the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. It's written by Rhiannon Giddens, one of my favorites, and composer Michael Abels. It's basically about a Muslim slave, and he escaped, and then he was captured after he had traveled a few states. And when he was in his cell, he started writing Arabic on the wall of his cell, and people were just so like, oh my God, this, not only can he write, but what is he writing? And so one of a local planter took him under his wing and just sort of supported him and helped him get his freedom. So it sounds like a really interesting opera.
Are we talking American slavery period?
American slavery,
okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I also love the Spoleto Festival. If I could, I would just be there all the time, because they such a wonderful selection of stuff. But I especially love Rhiannon Giddens, her interests, and just sounds really fascinating.
Yeah. One thing I missed, I wish I had seen, was the M Butterfly that they did at Santa Fe, Wong Rose opera, and I didn't get to see it. I was thinking of getting out there, but I have been sequestered.
I think it's still running, isn't it? It goes to the end of this month. I had heard that the Tristan was transcendent, and I was very seriously considering flying out there to see that. Just to do it would have been like a 36-hour trip, like fly to Santa Fe, see an opera, fly back.
Cool.
But we kind of did that.
It's still running until the end of this month. So Peter, you could see Tristan and M Butterfly.
Right. Yeah.
We haven't had a show since we saw Quamino's map in Chicago. I don't think we've done a show since we.
No, I didn't know you saw it. You saw it?
Yeah. Brooke and I both just ended up like, hey, I'm going to be in Chicago. Right.
Well, tell me about it. That was such a wonderful show interview with them. How did it come out?
I would love for the opera to have a little bit more time to bake. I do. I think it's such a worthy story. And I think I enjoyed the composition, but I did feel like the story was rushed, and it was more so written to fit in a certain amount of time rather than to take the time to tell the story.
I also felt like the libretto did way too much. Sorry, Ashley, Renee, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, what's his name? Juba Freeman was the main character, and I thought it was really interesting of this idea that he was a fiddle player, and that's how he was going to find his footing. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. But, it just kind of happened at the end. It was like, I'm struggling, to find, figure out what freedom is, and to navigate still living in, oppression, and still dealing with racism, even though I've been freed, from the United States. And then, it was such like a hefty story. And it felt like at the end, just seeing, the triumphant raise of the bow was just not enough. I need to know how someone, during that time period survives as finds a living as a musician. And, that felt like Act 1. So I want to see Act 2. And I would love if Chicago Opera Theater would commission a continuation of that story.
I thought there were some really cool ideas happening in the music and the orchestration. I felt like the libretto, like it was simultaneously too much and not enough. It was not entirely clear which story they were really trying to tell, to tell all of the stories that they wanted to tell, it would have needed to be at least another hour of opera. And
How long was it? How long was it?
Short. It was like less than 2 hours.
But I think
wow.
that's a part of like the brand to not have long operas.
Right.
Which you can see now, like why sometimes it just takes a little bit more time for a story to develop or do less.
It's a pretty ambitious story to do in that amount of time.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
I was glad to see it. And there's some very successful performances. Like the singer sounded great. And so that part was fun.
What was the character Tyrone Chambers played? He also was a former slave, if I'm not mistaken, but just really still connected back to like continental Africa and carried a lot of that old, almost mystical like wisdom. Like I don't know if it was just the way that Tyrone played it or not, but his character like brought a sense of comfort and sureness to me to some of the scenes.
Yeah. He seemed to be sort of like a soothsayer type character, like the function that he played in the storytelling. And he was given some really good music to sing, which was also very satisfying. And it seemed like that character was fleshed out after the workshop. There are some very cool elements. It just needs more time. And I have no idea if more productions are planned or if they have even, like, if there's any consideration to revising it at all. I don't know.
It sounds like a worthy project, though. It sounds it's such a great story if they can work on it again.
The subject matter is so fascinating.
Also speaks to like some of these commissions too, and it's just like time and resources. I'm really curious to know like when everything started, and did it feel like it had adequate amount of time to actually fully form. I'm curious to know like the timing of that. And I know that company does good work of doing newer or commissions. So I guess it kind of comes with the territory, but I'd be curious to know about the timeline.
And they were in different cities too, weren't they?
Yeah, well,
as they were writing.
That's her name, right? Erilyn.
Yeah.
She lives in the UK, doesn't she?
Wallace.
So,
right.
Erilyn Wallace. Yeah. So, since seeing or recording that podcast, I've noticed it's showed up, that theme of American freedmen appearing in England. I was watching Queen Victoria, and there were characters appearing that were coming from that. I was like, oh wow, this is something that at least the British recognize, because I've never seen it in an American film mentioned. Has anyone seen anything else they want to bring to the table?
I actually saw a lot of stuff.
Brooke was getting at it.
I saw, let's see, I'm not going to do this in order. I'm just going to do it in the order on my list, which has it popped into my brain. I went to
Can you do it as if you were Chuck, and then just do like 7 in a row without any pauses in between? Just go on from one to the other.
I could, but I won't.
Sorry, Chuck. We love you.
Yeah, Chuck isn't here tonight, so
I hope your horse tranquilizer is doing you well.
Yeah, Chuck's taking care of something.
He's taking care of business at home. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so the most recent thing that I saw was Orestia at the Park Avenue Armory, which is not opera, it's a play. It was really striking, and unlike opera, they felt no need to make it short.
Is that
3 hours?
Who wrote? Is that
an adaptation of Orestia, which was originally like a Greek
tragedy, right?
Tragedy based on the Agamemnon and Electra story and Orestes. If you've seen Electra the opera, the general storyline. It just starts before Electra. So, and it ends with Orestes killing Clytemnestra, right?
Right.
But then it's like set in this, they've reformatted it in this very modern context, and it was very, very esoteric, very sort of British. And I was totally into it. It was long. I don't know if you've been in the Park Avenue Armory. It's a fascinating space.
Mm-hmm.
And they had these timers. So it was intermission, and you had 15 minutes, and there was a timer. And
Wow.
It was ticking down during the whole thing. And the second the timer, and the actors were on stage the whole time, the second the timer, like doing whatever they had to do, the second the timer ended, they went immediately back into the storytelling. It was shocking. I was like, I wish that had been 20 minutes and not 15. But they had there were, I think, 4 acts in total. It was really fascinating. I don't know where else it's going to be performed. I think it had been other places before the Park Avenue Armory. It's worth
British company doing it.
They did Orestia and they did Hamlet, and it's a repertory company, and so the actors were in both shows. I don't know how one does that, but they did it. So that was cool. You should, if nothing else, you should read a review of it or something, just because it was a really interesting content. It was very minimalist, very modern, very streamlined, sort of. There's a bathtub and a table and a wall that they could make it see through or not. So it was interesting.
Is that the bathtub where Agamemnon meets his end?
Yes.
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 There's a lot of that. There's also like a moment at the beginning where Iphigenia asks what they're eating, and they tell her they're eating deer, and then she has a crisis about eating a deer. Like, it's very like they got all the pieces in there, and it was a lot.
It's not a vegan show.
No, it's not a vegan show.
No.
I'm not going.
Greek theater rarely is.
No. Yeah. I also went to Cabrillo Festival. I don't know if anyone knows what Cabrillo Festival is. It's a new music festival in Santa Cruz. It's been around. It was their 60th anniversary this year. The first year post-pandemic that they've been doing live events. I'd never been to it before. It's very to my like anti-capitalist sentiments. It's very pro accessibility in terms of like there are multiple open rehearsals that are free and open to the public. I mean, now you have to like show a vaccine card and wear a mask, but like anybody can go in and listen to the orchestra rehearse. It's a 2-week long festival. It's in Santa Cruz, which was a great place to spend the last week of July because it was so hot here. Santa Cruz was like 75. That was great. I saw a Room Full of Teeth performed. I don't know if that's a new music vocal ensemble. They are exceptional. They do really cool programming. They are excellent. They were also involved in the premiere of Scott Ordway's piece that was about the fires in California, The End of Rain. And it was about like the fires. He wrote it during the pandemic because he's from Santa Cruz, even though he's not like an East Coast composer, but he's from Santa Cruz. And so during the pandemic, he went and interviewed hundreds of people who were affected by the fires and wrote this very cool piece. So I highly recommend West Coast people. Cabrillo Festival is very cool. You should check it out. It's very chill and like very Santa Cruz. They perform in the Civic Auditorium, which is very like democratic building, sort of WPA vibe. But it also has a great acoustic. They've done a lot with the acoustics. It's cool. And they do like the music, the programming is super interesting, and it's great to hear new music in a place like Santa Cruz because, but usually you just hear people with their speakers on the street playing lots of loud music there too. It's an interesting town. Santa Cruz is fascinating. I'm doing the Chuck thing. I saw Tanglewood Festival of Contemporary Music. I saw George Benjamin's Lessons in Love and Violence as conducted by George Benjamin himself. He wrote Written on Skin as well. George Benjamin writes the most extraordinary orchestration. It's a very dark, heavy show. I'll just say that. It was the Tanglewood Fellows sang. They were very good. I find that the Tanglewood Institute has a very specific aesthetic. So all the singers sort of fall in line with this very specific aesthetic. But they were excellent. Highly recommend checking that opera out. And if you don't know George Benjamin's music, it's really worth listening to. I also saw Rigoletto with Resonance Works Pittsburgh back in May. I think it was maybe their first opera since the pandemic as well. So when I was on my way to Cleveland to perform in La Casa de Bernardo Alba, I stopped in Pittsburgh to see Resonance Works.
Cool, you got to perform too.
I did.
That's very cool.
I did a premiere of Griffin Candy and Caridad Spitch's production of La Casa de Bernardo Alba, which is an adaptation of the Lorca play. That was very depressing. Also an all-female cast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
You know the play?
Not at all.
So Lorca wrote a story about uneducated rural women in a very oppressive, abusive household, and it was intended as an allegory for fascism. Because I guess in Lorca's mind, and really actually in my mind too, I don't think there are people who are more oppressed than undereducated poor women who live in extreme poverty, and they live at the whim of the men who live around them. And so it was basically like these women are living under the thumb. Bernarda Alba is the matriarch, and she is the oppressor, but she's identified with the patriarchy, and so she's upholding patriarchal ideals in this household, and abusing her daughters. Yeah. So, but I mean, the opera itself is well constructed. I think I think it also needs some revisions. It needs more time. Like, needs to be longer than it is.
You really do think that they're trying to make shorter operas?
Yes.
Is that really? Yeah. It's like a conscious thing.
Yes.
That's so interesting.
I don't think it's a good idea. I understand why they're doing it. I don't think it's a good idea, especially since Marvel movies are now like 3 hours long and nobody seems to care.
Yeah,
I was just thinking that Marvel movies are getting longer and longer. I personally don't mind because it's more content that I enjoy. But
well, I think
they're just trying to make it accessible to more people, right? Is that it?
I mean,
go on, Brooke.
I think the biggest, let people have popcorn and beer and make the seats more comfortable.
That's the thing.
Do that.
Yeah, make a festival out of it.
Yeah. I think, it's an attention span issue. So, I mean, it's it was already a social media thing. And then with COVID, people's attention spans have just gotten shorter and shorter. But I think if you make content that is engaging and you also make the space, to your point, Brooke, let people snack or get up and walk.
Yeah. I was thinking about that as well in media in general, people are binge watching entire seasons of TV shows in one day. I don't think attention spans are shorter, and I don't. Movies are getting really long.
What you can do with so while you're binge watching, you're also on your phone. You're also, so it is, and it doesn't have 100% of your attention.
Right.
And it doesn't have to. Right. And you can also rewind what you missed. And so you have that. But, in live theater, you don't have that luxury. But I do think if it were more inviting spaces, with the less.
I mean, all of this has been done before. I mean, when Homer was when he did the Iliad and the Odyssey, he did them in like 6-hour chunks,
Mm.
and he would just be sitting there singing. People were like drinking and talking, and Indian, some Indian theater is like that too.
Yeah.
Japanese theater is like that. So we should return to that in a way.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid in Peterborough, New Hampshire, they had the Monadnock Music would have these concerts. And one of them was recreating a Solomon concert, which was Beethoven's big concerts. He made very few when he was alive. But one of them premiered the Beethoven fourth and fifth piano concertos. They played the Fifth Symphony. Then there was the premiere of the Sixth Symphony. And then Beethoven sat down and played an impromptu. So that was one of the concerts. So when I was a kid, I went to this. They recreated it, and Russell Sherman played the concertos, and then he sat down and played a Beethoven impromptu, and they just sort of reconstructed it. And as a kid, I mean, I was a teenager, I thought, wow, this is great. First of all, that this conductor and this orchestra trusts me enough to allow to do this, to think that I'm going to sit through this and that I can take it. And I felt good about that. It did not feel long. It went by so quickly. So I think the content just needs to be good. And those seats were horribly uncomfortable, and there was no beer or cell phones.
I do feel like taking care of people's comfort. I think, being less precious about the experience and just allowing people to be human and be comfortable, they're going to be much more inclined to go and spend 4 hours sitting in an opera house if the seats are comfortable and they know they're going to be able to get up to go to the bathroom without getting yelled at or shushed, and they know they're going to be able to eat food when they need to eat food. And when operas were originally conceived of that way, they were not considered like people would mill around and do whatever they wanted. And, our venues are not constructed for that kind of behavior, which maybe they should be. But at a minimum, we can maybe try to make it a little bit more comfortable by letting people have food and maybe let intermissions be longer. I mean, I know that there's union issues and all sorts of stuff, but it isn't, if you go to the Met and you want to get a drink, you're going to go, there's a 20-minute intermission. Every single other person also wants to get a drink. If you're lucky, you'll get a drink, you'll throw it back, and then they're ringing the bell for you to go back in.
Yeah,
you didn't get to pee. You didn't get to talk to anybody. How is that? That's not hospitable to the audience.
To be able to bring your drink in and just in a closed container or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's a place for it all. There will still be those, dress up, put on your Sunday best, as they say, and sit quiet. I don't think that's going to go away. And I don't think it's bad to have, shorter operas if the story is told well, if it's done well, but not just short for the sake of being short.
Yeah, right. It's like having a stopwatch, saying we were going to write to this and then.
Yeah, I mean, because it depends. If you're writing operas, if it's a commission for a children's opera or for an opera that is going to be more for school programming and things like that, it's not going to be a 2 or 3 hour opera for feasibility issues as well. Kids can't just sit there.
Well, apparently neither can adults.
Yeah.
But the whole audience sat for all of Orestia, and there was so much silence. I mean, a straight theater, there's no music, so much silence, and they just sat there. You could hear a pin drop in that theater. Someone would drop their program, and the whole audience would jump because it was so quiet in the theater. And that was almost 4 hours. And all those people sat there happily listening to Greek tragedy. So I think we can handle it.
Engagement. It's funny. Yeah. I'm just remembering now. I did see, it wasn't opera, but we just took a group of 7th graders to see Come From Away on Broadway. And I was, worried that they were going to, lose and it was going to dip and they were going to not be into it. and I was watching the students almost as much as I was watching the production itself. The show is triggering, so it's like that's hard. But the kids were just like, literally eyes wide open, sitting at the edge of their seats and just looking for reasons to like explode, with, applause and stuff like that. And no one was like, I gotta use the bathroom or anything. Like, I don't think they wanted to leave, because they didn't want to miss any part of the story.
Have you done any performing, Ashley, Renee?
Not since. So I actually have. I don't know when it's going to come out, but I actually did a special project, I guess you would call a commission for an in-series opera in DC, which is a combination of some of my original music along with some reworked Dupart that's actually reworked to be like a fusion between classical and R&B.
Cool.
And not in the cheesy kind of way. Like, it's truly fusion, and it's really exciting. And then some Strauss songs and spirituals all in one setting. So whenever that comes out, I don't know when they're going to release it, but they have it, and it's really good.
What is it exactly?
Yeah, it's actually a visual album.
A visual album that you created.
Yeah.
Great.
So it's a really exciting project. Whenever it comes out,
you got to tell us when it comes out.
Yeah, I will. But I haven't been doing much. I'm getting the pull. I did a Beethoven 9 this spring and just got back into that orchestral world and got the bug again. So yeah.
Me too. I just got into the orchestral world a little. I was asked to do a concert with the Yonkers Philharmonic, and we had a great time. It was such a classic pops concert from my childhood. They gave me a list of 18 things to perform, to choose from, and make an hour and 10 program. I threw out some things which were horrible.
We won't tell.
We won't tell.
We just told everybody.
A medley from Cats.
You kept that in, right?
No.
Oh, Peter, how could you?
And there's also a medley from Annie or something. They might have been great, but I just, no.
You won't sink that low.
It was great fun. We did, American in Paris. We did, stuff like that. And some West Side Story. It was really, I had a really good time. But getting into the orchestra world, I noticed that, or I hadn't thought about this before, the fact that we're working in a storytelling medium with personalities has forced the opera community to respond to the changing social dynamics that are happening now much faster than the orchestral world. It's because the stories aren't in your face. Yes, there's still the same issues of sexism and racism and all that, but it doesn't, there's not a character embodying that within the music or anything like that. So that they're dealing with these issues at a slower rate than I would say opera. I feel like opera's been a little more aggressive about it, but that just might be I see Brooke, were you not agreeing with me?
I have some opinions.
The
orchestral world. So, and so there are some orchestras that are doing some really interesting work. So, and really progressive, really like pushing the envelope, trying to diversify their programming and diversify their venues in terms of like performing in different places and really doing some really interesting but they are very much in the minority. And I think
Oakland Symphony.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated situation. I have empathy for the people who run orchestras to some extent because their ticket buyers want to go and hear Beethoven, and I know that is a reality. That is an issue. But because in my day job working for the Copeland Fund and where we fund new music and we're interested in new music, it is always the orchestras who forget about like DEI issues, just getting them to program music that was written since 1960 by anyone is impossible. Or they'll like program like a 3-minute piece at the beginning of their program, and then it'll be like Beethoven and Mozart, or you know, they're whatever, Bruckner, Brahms, right? And like, okay, well, first of all, I have a particular bias against Beethoven symphonies because I've heard them all way too many times, and I could never hear them again, and that would be fine. So that's my own personal bias. But you know, like, there's a lot of great like canon orchestral repertoire that I love, and I'm happy to hear. But I get really excited when I hear an orchestra play something I've never heard before, or that I've only heard once or twice. You know, and so it's a problem. The other issue I think that they really struggle with is that because of the size of an orchestra, they're limited in what kind of venues they can perform in. They can't just like an opera company can do stuff in, you know, a library or in a bar or in a black box theater. An orchestra can't do that. They
well, that's also because of they can do chamber music. They can do.
Right, but then you're not talking about an orchestra. Like orchestras don't do chamber music, right? Like, I mean, they might have chamber ensembles that they extract or whatever, but like that's not orchestral programming. So, you know, if you're talking about programming music for 40 plus players, you are very limited in where you can do that, and which means you have to sell a certain number of tickets in order just to even like break even. So, however, the people who are running orchestras are also, they have their heads in the sand. I mean, I would say that they are not paying attention to what's happening in the world.
Right.
They're catering entirely to their boards and to their audiences who demand Beethoven, and they're not trying to reach other people.
Well,
I mean, that's a whole other world, though. It's like we've been talking about opera, which, you know, has at least some more accessible storytelling elements. There's, you know, live action and all those things. But when you get into the orchestral world, I don't even think the audience that opera has managed to reach has even figured out how to reach those audiences.
But what about the New York Philharmonic? They are definitely, if you've looked at what they're programming this year, it's impressive. It is impressive. Every single concert has a major work, not just a 2-minute work by BIPOC, Alana, gay, lesbian, women, you know, all sorts of, it's just a really wonderful season coming up at the Philharmonic.
But that's
like Tazewell Thompson.
Like 3 years.
No, this is the first time since the new hall.
No, it's
a new
right. But this is new. Like that's my point. It's like whereas opera's been dealing with this for a decade and like really talking about it and thinking about it. Like orchestras, it's been like since the beginning of the pandemic, and it's only been because it's been in everybody's faces.
I think that I don't want to say there's a benefit from the horrible things we've been through, but sometimes a shaking up economically and things can get people to sort of readjust their priorities and maybe look in a new way. I mean, opera, we were saying the same thing about opera people about, you know, they just want to see Bohème and blah, 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 blah. And we were saying that not too long ago. So I'm curious just to see, I was just sort of surprised by that. And that, you know, during the interview process I'm actually talking to a few orchestras, which is interesting. Let's actually talk about this too. There are posted auditions and an audition process for orchestras.
Yes.
I don't see any for opera. I don't see them. There's no interviews. There's no calls. You're not asked to come and conduct an opera as an audition to become the music director. There's not an audition committee and blah, blah, blah. It is a totally different thing. And it's actually
just a behind the scenes thing.
Selecting of a music director for an opera company is secret because in an orchestra, the orchestra members have committees that then help select who is who in an opera company. There's not a cast. The opera company, the central group of people that are consistent from production to production is the administrative staff. So it's much less democratic.
Yeah.
And in the symphonic world, they're posting these auditions and they're asking for people's resumes and they're doing interviews and they're asking people to conduct concerts.
But even for high profile orchestras?
Well, no, I don't know. That to me is magic. That's fairy dust. I don't know.
Fairy dust.
I mean, I would say it depends on the orchestra, right? But if we're talking about any sort of union orchestra, I am sure it's in their union contract that like they get a say in who gets.
They have to say, yeah.
Maybe if an opera company has like a union, if an opera company has a union chorus, the chorus might get a say in some way. I don't know.
Really?
For example, if like I don't know if the Met,
Nope.
if the Met, I have no idea. Did the Met chorus
They
have
probably
any
don't.
say in Yannick being hired?
I doubt it.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I could ask. I know some people who are on the roster, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the orchestras I've been
curious.
talking to are not union. These are not union orchestras.
Yeah, but the union rules trickle down. You know, in the orchestra world, the union rules trickle down.
In the opera world, there's there's been a wave of new works and new composers putting stuff out there, and you know that stuff is attracting a younger audience and a more interesting audience. Is that happening in the symphonic world? Are there new composers out there writing new pieces for orchestras?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
the funny
probably,
thing is
but
when I
don't
go and
know
look
of
at the new composers and stuff, half of them are people we've interviewed. They're opera people. Opera people are doing pretty well with orchestras right now. I don't know. What do you think, Brooke?
I think that it's hard for young composers to get into either. So one of the cool things about the Cabrillo Festival is that they have like programs for young composers and also for young conductors. And so they were premiering works by composers who were under the age of 30, and to have a full professional orchestra play a work that you've written, I think is once you get out of school. And even in school, like I don't remember when I was in school, any of the composers having access to the whole student orchestra.
Yeah.
So part of the issue for young composers is they don't have access. You know, singers will happily like sign up to just sing anything. It's partly the community. Like singers are like, yes, we'll help you. I mean, we can say we're desperate, but also there's a real investment in trying things and growing things and experimenting. Orchestral musicians are less inclined to do that, and I can't speak to why. I mean, certainly there are lots of new music players who are excited about new music and they'll play anything because they're into it, but there's less of a sort of availability of ensembles. So that's, I think, the big issue that young composers face with either opera or orchestral music. It's easy to write for a string quartet. It's not that hard to find a string quartet to play your music. But if you want to write for a 100-piece smaller size orchestra, like who's going to do that? Kind of how are you going to get who's going to pay for that, right? And so you need to get a commission by an organization that can pay for that.
Well, even to get an orchestra to do it for free is probably not easy. You know, maybe there's like a student orchestra they could find or something.
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, there are volunteer orchestras, but a lot of them are. I don't know how good they would be with non-standard repertoire. Like that's the other issue, right? Like you get a community orchestra. They might be enthusiastic, but you're not necessarily going to get a recording that you can do anything with because if it's not good.
Have you all seen this new role that Houston Grand Opera put out with the composer in residence? Joelle Thompson.
Say the name again?
Joelle Thompson.
Joelle,
yeah. So he is the composer in residence now for Houston Grand Opera. And it's a really interesting effort because with him being there, it's kind of it's a multi-armed kind of approach to a lot of these sort of challenges. Like he's mentoring young composers and working to get new compositions out, but also going at it from an education standpoint and also working with some of the local school communities in Houston. And he's a part of the leadership team with Houston Grand Opera. So it's a really interesting way of getting at some of those challenges. And it's not necessarily just commissioning, because I think the Met has some quiet program they're doing with, BIPOC composers. Um, I don't know what's going to come of it, if anything will come of it. I think they've been working with some of them quietly.
Quietly.
Very quietly.
I think. I don't know, but I do know for efforts like this, and I don't think it's just limited to an orchestra, but it is nice to have sort of an additional eye on thinking about the future of engagement and the future of composition, and future composers within a company, and having a role like that to do it. And having it be led up by another, fresh composer too as well. I think is a really interesting take on it.
Some arts organizations are coming to realize that they are members of their communities, and that they are not they are not outside of their communities, or they are not institutions that exist regardless of their communities. And so, as I think we will see more of these sorts of like integrated positions, in the sense that like they hold, they're here as artists, but they're artists that their job is also to engage with the community and to bring the community together, and just sort of be much less institutional. I don't really know how else to say that. Just there's always been this sort of like siloed relationship that arts organizations have had with their communities, and I'm seeing that that's happening less with a lot of places. Not all places.
It's funny because they've always had this. You've had community centers, and then you've had arts and like institutions and organizations, and really they all are community centers. But they've kind of, they were using this term outreach, which I think is finally starting to die out.
Good.
Because it is, we all know it's a very problematic term. And I think I see places like Lincoln Center sort of reorienting and doing as much programming now as they can that's actually for the community, and involves and includes the community. I think they can and they will do more.
I like us to think a little bit about what the idea of what community is, and the idea of, especially like the orchestra I've been talking to, it's not just reaching out to the community. The community actually is part of the orchestra. They should be members of the community. That also to look at your community as the orchestra itself. Like, how do you perform for each other? How do you treat each other? How do you behave as a community, just to an internal community that sometimes doesn't get examined because players are coming and going and blah, 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 blah. But how are we dealing with being a good community for the people inside the institution as well? And the diversity of your community should be the same reflected in the orchestra, right? Yeah. And in the board and in the administration. And I'm sorry, but what were you going to say, Brooke?
I was just going to say that I'm happy to know that Lincoln Center is making changes, because I was furious in June of 2020 when Lincoln Center's entire campus was totally closed off to access to the public at all. So first of all, just in terms of what was happening in the world politically, but also it was one of the few like outdoor places where people could theoretically convene during a global pandemic. This was June 2020, right? And people were not allowed on the campus. You couldn't walk around them.
I've had a long relationship with that institution, and still do. And it goes as relationships go. But in hindsight, I have to say, I don't think it was best, but I do think they thought they were doing what was best, in that they panicked, I think. And literally just did not have people on. No one was on campus. Like, offices and things were ghost towns. But what Lincoln Center did do was they did move online. which I think actually laid some of the groundwork for what it did. Lay a lot of the groundwork actually, because when they moved online, because we were doing those experimental pop-up classrooms, which we started to deliver that content on a multiple day a week basis, almost episodic it became. But also what it allowed Lincoln Center to do was to start to engage with more artists within the whole like greater New York community. And a lot of those artists that got that were engaged in that digital platform actually moved when Lincoln Center did reopen. They started to bring them onto those outdoor stages.
Yeah.
So it actually expanded artists that were interacting with Lincoln Center by have them have those digital, because actually what Lincoln Center saw was the numbers. They saw the engagement. They saw how many people were actually watching and tuning in versus digital content they had been putting out prior to 2020 that did not have nearly as much engagement.
Right.
And I think that is what was kind of I think, if I could sit down and I could talk with some of my colleagues there, just based on my outside observations and of looking at the evolution of institutions, I think that was a jarring, I still think it was a jarring thing to do, but I appreciated the recovery out of it. But I mean, I'm talking about like local artists, indie artists from Brooklyn who are now performing on the stages of Lincoln Center. Artists that are quote unquote amateur artists were getting slots to perform at Lincoln Center as a part of the community programming.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So it became a more accessible. There were people who would have never gotten billing at Lincoln Center prior to the pandemic. And still that has been happening. I've had quite a few friends who have been a part of shows that are happening, especially in those outdoor stages. I would love it if that same kind of programming would happen indoors and on some of those stages within Lincoln Center. But those stages are very established. And I don't mean that in a good way. I mean that in a established and not as accessible, not as flexible as these outdoor spaces that literally had to be built
right.
in order to welcome them in. I would love to see some of the constituent stages following the lead of Lincoln Center. Because Lincoln Center is Lincoln Center. It's a giant landlord essentially. But I would love to see the Mets and the New York Phils and the New York City Ballets and, all of the other sort of major cultural institutions that are housed on the Lincoln Center campus, keeping that same energy inside during the winter programming.
Yeah.
I think it's a paradigm shift about like what it means to be in relationship, right? Because what used to be the understanding was that arts institutions would make arts and the audience would come, but there was no other than that. There was no other relationship that was happening. But that is not a sustainable way. I mean, it's like living in a house with somebody you don't speak to. Like that's not a good relationship that's happening. So like it's a sort of like building and understanding that like, if one isn't doing well, the other's not doing well. Like a city that doesn't have good arts institutions is not doing well. And arts institutions in a city that's not doing well are not doing well. Like it's all integrated. It's all together. We're all in this together. And like taking a real responsibility for the piece that you play as an arts institution in the well-being of an entire city. And I see Lincoln Center doing that, but I don't necessarily see the Metropolitan Opera doing that. They're getting better-ish, But I still don't think that they've had that full like paradigm shift of being like, we have a responsibility to the city of New York. Right. They're thinking they're somewhere else. They're in $320 million budget land. They're not thinking about like, what does it mean to be in right relationship with your city?
So Met, take note. You've been served by Brooke.
Brooke has spoken.
Right.
Brooke has
I'm
spoken.
sure that they care a whole lot about what I think about their advertising and their community engagement.
I bet
Tomorrow,
they do.
Peter Gelb is going to be like, "Hey, tell me what Brooke said on that podcast."
I mean, it's interesting because all of the institutions, I feel like I've had some touch with just about all of their education programs, and they get it. And those arms, I feel like anytime you have major institutions like that or major, I feel like the education is happening, so that's enough. And so it's going through because, education is, another word for outreach and education. It's like, it is.
What's a better word if outreach is dead? Is there a better word that you
programming.
think? Just programming.
Community
just
programming.
Right. Serving your community.
It's not even it's just programming. It's like, I think if you can start to get rid of hierarchical language like serving and outreach and things that imply that you are anything that implies that you are reaching down and reaching, it implies that you hold some kind of power that you have the privilege to release or not to release. And that's why I say it, if cultural institutions saw themselves as community centers are looked down upon by cultural institutes, or not looked down upon. It's, oh no, those are the ones where, the programming happens, the after school programming happens, and that's the center for the community. And I just worked the middle school arts audition program, boot camp at Lincoln Center. And I really appreciated so many of the sort of leaders of Lincoln Center saying to these students, like, this is your campus. And it is, because tons of tax dollars go towards it.
You paid for it. Your parents paid for it.
Right. Somebody pays. I mean, yes, they have, private sector funding as well, but they also get cultural funding. So they are, in essence, partially at least funded by the community.
Right. That is brilliant. Thank you.
Any dollars, you are any dollars, unless you are fully privately funded. If you get any kind of, cultural dollars, then you are a institution of the community.
If you're a 501c3,
right,
an institution that belongs to the community, because you're basically diverting taxable income into creating a program.
Yeah,
right? So 501c3s are just tax shelters for rich people. Let's be real. So, and we are one. So rich people.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah. Who are we sheltering?
Right, but if we're a tax deductible institution, as we are, and as many are, you are inherently a community organization because you are taking tax dollars out of the tax base and putting it into your programming or into your activities or whatever you do.
And also receiving. You're taking it out by not putting it in. Yeah. And you're also receiving. So you're still getting cultural funding. Mm-hmm. So you are at least partially funded by the community. And so it can't just be lip service. I believed it. I loved seeing, I don't know how many middle schoolers we had, like my studio, our vocal studio had about 24, 25 kids. The visual arts studio had like 70, something like that. And I love seeing kids just comfortably moving about the campus, sitting out, eating lunch, and just sort of taking in the space that in many instances they didn't even know existed. I think that is what a community center is. It's a safe space. It's a space for the community to gather and to exchange. And I think that is what's missing in, I have to say in these cultural institutions, but not just in New York, in most places, it's the exchange that's missing. And that's why I enjoy the outdoor programming that happens. This is far better than what was happening before, where the idea of outdoor programming was watching a rebroadcast of a Met Opera on the plaza. Mm-hmm. Fun, cool if you're into that, but like it's not an exchange. It's just licensing of something that's already gotten lots of money, getting more money. Mm-hmm. But this was artists from all over, New York City, all of the boroughs performing and owning and having a sense of ownership on these stages at Lincoln Center. And that it's just, I want to see that happening inside. I want to see the Met. I think what lit me up about Fire Shut Up in My Bones was the, 10-minute applause after, the step show scene. And it's like you can have programming that is an hour of that kind of electrifying, because the audience was hungry for it. That's why they had that kind of response. It was something they didn't even know that they were missing until they experienced it. Mm. So I'm like, if you have programming like that, have your operas, do your symphonies, do your ballets, do your Nutcrackers and your Swan Lakes and all of those things, and your La Bohemes and your Beethovens. Do them because there's an audience for them, but also do things that ignite and that invite and that offer exchange and access.
Awesome. We have to bring this lovely show to a close. It has been such a treat to hear all of your voices again. I'm so sorry that Chuck was not with us today. I know. There's no Chuck in the booth. Miss you, Chuck. And I just want to thank you all. That was brilliant. Ashley, Renee, you've made a paradigm shift in my brain, reconceptualizing this. I absolutely love it. And seriously, I'm going to carry that around with me for a few days and let it marinate. I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Say ciao.
See you soon.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our show. Please give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to our YouTube channel or audio podcast feed on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback of any kind, please let us know by emailing us at comments@indieopera.com. Help us to make the future of opera brighter and bolder with a tax-deductible gift today. Donate to the Indie Opera Podcast on our website, Facebook, or on Patreon for special benefits. This episode of the Indie Opera Podcast was recorded on Zoom with co-hosts Walker Lewis, Peter Zepp, Ashley Renee Watkins, Brooke Larimer. Our show was created with the support of co-hosts Ashley Renee Watkins and Walker Lewis, Business and Operations Manager Brooke Larimer, Associate Producer Chuck Sachs, Jonathan Blaylock, PR Consultant, Gregory Moomji, Web Correspondent, and Rosha Kriyan, our theme song creator. This episode was edited by Peter Zepp. Thank you for watching.